The ancestral background of every U.S. president. This is going to be interesting because you want to know what country really controls America. Well, here's a clear, maybe cut winner. We're going to see a lot of English on this list, probably a lot of Scottish, and things are going to get a little bit more interesting, actually a lot more interesting as we get into the more modern times. But these early days, obviously everyone's going to be English. We're coming from the British Isles. So our first president, George Washington, he was English. He literally fought the English and killed lots of English. Then it was John Adams. He was our second president, also English. And finally, it wasn't until our third president we had a non-purely English purebred. I guess, well, George Washington and John Adams probably weren't purebreds, but definitely close to it, I would assume. English, Scottish, and Welsh for Thomas Jefferson. Okay, so these are the first three presidents. Let's see who else we got, because now we're going to start to scroll over, and we're going to get to more of the modern day. So again, lots of English. Who was the first Dutch guy? Buchanan or something like that? I'm not 100% about that. Lots of English, lots of Scottish. It's 1817. In fact, James Madison fought his home country because the War of 1812 saw us fight once again the UK, also Canada. James Monroe, Scottish, English, Welsh. Now, does the ordering of the flags make a difference? I feel like they kind of do, because wasn't it earlier? Yeah, for Thomas Jefferson, English was first, then Scottish. So maybe James Monroe had a bit more Scottish blood. He ruled for 2 terms. Sorry, he was president for 2 terms. It seems weird to call it rule. He was president for 2 terms. There we go. There's a new flag. Andrew Jackson. He was from Ulster, or Scottish, Irish, Ulster, something like that. And he was Irish. Andrew Jackson, the first Irish U.S. president. He's a controversial one, that's for sure. But in his battles, I mean, there's definitely a reason he was elected for presidency. That's for sure. Because he was pretty epic in terms of what he did as a general, obviously, which eventually... There he is! I was right about that! Martin Van Buren, my bad. Not Buchanan. What was I thinking? I knew it was like something with a B, but our first Dutch president was in 1837. Now, I wonder at the time, were people a little sussed out by that? I gotta think that they were. I gotta think in the 1830s, we're like, don't let that damn Dutch controlling us. We don't need those damn... This country was ruled over by the Scots and the Irish, and the Irish was a new one. So really, by 1829, we started opening the floodgates to a lot more newer heritages, ancestry. So one thing to keep in mind, I think by these time periods, specifically the 1830s, a lot of people were starting to become actually born as America. Remember that we weren't an independent country until we declared independence in 1776. We wouldn't fully win that freedom and beat the British until it was 1783 or something like that. By the 1830s, a majority of the country, maybe, dare I say a majority, it's got to be close. By the 40s, we're actually born in the nation known as the USA for the first time. Everything before this point, it was a lot of randos. They were born all around the world, mostly from England or Scotland or Ireland, and they just happened to migrate to this new thing called America. So maybe the American identity really started to set in, and that's why we see more people with different backgrounds and heritage. Well, I say that, and William Henry Harrison comes up as English and Scottish, but yeah, that's fine. He was only there for like a month, a year, 1841. While his replacement, John Tyler, he was going to be English and Scottish. We go back to... my bad, I just almost died. Go back to Scottish-Irish Ulster with James Polk in 1845. He was a 1-term president here. Zachary Taylor, again. Wow! Okay. Well, we got the Dutch guy, and we're like, no. No more of those Dutch guys anymore. So maybe the anti-Dutch people before he got elected really ramped up the propaganda, and they continue to push him out. So Zachary Taylor, 1 year. Millard Fillmore. We have Welsh, once again, making it into the category. Now we're about to enter into the Civil War. So how is that going to affect the American psyche? It might possibly, but still a lot of English, Irish, and Scots. Isn't Donald Trump partially Dutch? Isn't he like majorly Dutch? We're going to find out about that. But James Buchanan was the one that I was thinking of, my bad. But he's the Scots-Irish. Okay, so here's Abraham Lincoln. Damn, imagine at this time. So now America's about 100 years old. We've only been electing people from those islands, from the British Isles or Ireland, anything up there. And we had one Dutch dude. for like a little bit there. And then we just decided, now we're not doing that anymore. That must have been kind of a crazy time. Even though, I mean, I don't know how the people were thinking back then when they were electing, but do you think they really made note of this? I think that they cared that it was a white dude, and they cared that it was a man. And that was about it. Everything else, maybe it was just a de facto. Well, okay, so you have to think about who was coming into the U.S. at this time. There's tons of German immigration. Technically, there's also Chinese at the same time but you know, they were not obviously going to get elected to presidency. But I'm looking back at like the biggest immigrant groups and when they were coming in. There's lots of Germans coming in at this time. There's going to be lots of Irish and lots of Italians soon as well, as they run out of potatoes in Ireland, and then the Italians are going to deal with a lot. Andrew Johnson, English, Ulster. Ulster becomes a more and more popular heritage, I'm guessing. So 3 Ulsters in a row, essentially. But, you know, their heritage is starting to become really diluted at this point. I mean, it's starting to be... I mean, it's going to take about 100 years at least for people to figure this out. Now, I'm assuming because these are U.S. presidents, we know a lot more about their background rather than just a random person. But so I think we could probably trust this information a little bit more. Anyways, Welsh is headed back on the list, at least briefly, with James Garfield. Then we have just straight up Irish with Chester Arthur here for a single term. I feel like I never hear about Chester Arthur ever. Grover Cleveland, I finally do, and he has some German in him. There we go. And this is an interesting time to elect the first German heritage president because Germany just became its own country for the first time, 1871. So now Germany is, in fact, a thing. Okay, so this is when things are going to get interesting in the 20th century. We actually get to see some different flags, finally. So German. Cleveland was German. Okay, I say that, and then Benjamin Harris. English, Scottish, Irish. Here we go. Here's Irish for Grover Cleveland. I forgot that, so Grover Cleveland pulled the Trump. He was the first one to pull a Trump. He has one term. He loses. He has a second term. Non-contiguous terms. I'm like, did we have 2 presidents named Cleveland? No. William McKinley. He's entering into the 20th century. And finally, Theodore Roosevelt. Okay, thank you, Theo. This is partly why he's one of people's favorite presidents. He just has so many ancestry. I don't think that's actually true at all. But he does have more ancestry. But he is, in fact, a very popular, very, very popular president. I would say he's oftentimes labeled as top 5. I mean, I don't know a lot about U.S. presidents. People are like, there's a lot of Americans that are heavily, heavily invested in U.S. presidents and their debates and who's the best and yada, yada, yada. I am not really that interested in that stuff, but I can tell you that I hear Theodore Roosevelt oftentimes thrown around as top 5 presidents ever. So obviously he leads for 2 terms. He's Dutch, he's English, he's Scottish. He's also German and French. The first French president. You would think that we would have elected a French dude way earlier than this because we got the French Louisiana Purchase. We had purchased a bunch of French heritage in there. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if the American people were definitely not down to vote for anyone that could speak French for a while. But, hey, the French helped us get our independence in 1776, so we kind of owed them. So first French dude with a little bit of heritage, William Howard Taft. He also has some French in him. Oh, boy, Woodrow Wilson, everyone's favorite U.S. president. That's not true at all. He's very controversial. I've been hearing all sorts of things about Woodrow Wilson. English, Scottish, Dutch, and German for Warren Harding, who rules for 1 term after Woodrow Wilson. Calvin Coolidge, straight up just English. Now, that's a rare one to see just a singular flag again right here. That's cool. That's kind of crazy. He was a purebred English. Once again, a throwback. Herbert Hoover had some Swiss in him. That's crazy because considering what Herbert Hoover was known for, not necessarily the best things. You know, kind of leading the Americas through the Great Depression, the Hoovervilles and things like that. He was too neutral. He should have been less neutral. Maybe that was the problem. He was too Swiss. Franklin Roosevelt. He was French. He had a lot of Dutch in there. We do like our Dutch presidents, huh? We actually have more Dutch presidents with Dutch heritage than the French, which maybe is shocking. More than German, I think. I need to go back and count all these flags, actually. But obviously, Franklin Roosevelt, extremely popular president, one of the only president to serve, what, 4 terms? He didn't complete the 4 terms, but get elected 4 different times. Truman, back up there with the German heritage. Franklin Roosevelt doesn't have any German in him. Dwight Eisenhower, he's German, Dutch, and Swiss. Finally, we have John Kennedy back there with, he's bringing back the Irish. Then Lyndon B. Johnson. We got English, German, and Scott. Dang it, you know what? I thought it'd be a little bit more crazy later on into the timeline, but it's actually still the same stuff. English, Irish, Scottish. Man, who really controls the U.S.? It seems like England still controls the U.S. Now, I'm saying this because I just released my own ancestry, and I have also a lot of English. Like, if I were to become U.S. president, which I won't, but I'm just saying, if I were, I would be also a very boring person to include on this list. It's like English, Irish, Scottish. I don't think they'll include like the what is it, 4% Finnish? I don't think they're going to include that. Gerald Ford, Poland can into U.S. presidency. He's got some Polish and, of course, some Dutch in there, too. Let's go. The Poles finally making some representation. Jimmy Carter. Okay, well, he's coming back with the Welsh. Loving these AI-generated images of these guys. Irish, English, Scottish. Very boring, Reagan. Very boring. George H.W. Bush. Bringing in the English, the German, the Dutch, the Irish. I mean, at this point in the 90s, I mean, that's actually not true. I was going to say, aren't most Americans like just a weird combination of English and German? And no, that is definitely not the case. I mean, I literally saw it with my own ancestry video. I am just English, where there's actually very little. Everyone thinks that I'm German. I am not German at all. Maybe that's just because you don't see my height. If you saw my height, you'd be like, oh yeah, you're probably like English or Irish. Okay, we all of a sudden got into 240p quality. Thank you for that. George W. W was English, German, Dutch, and Irish. English, German, Dutch, and Irish. Now we have finally the real good stuff. Everyone was waiting for this moment. We have Obama, who had some Kenya, some English, some Welsh, some German, some Swiss, and also that Scots, old Irish. Then Donald Trump, German, Scottish, and oh, so he wasn't Dutch? I thought he did have some Dutch. Joe Biden was Irish. As far as I knew, he was very Irish. And apparently some French. And then Donald Trump joins in again. I mean, I'm excited to see what the next couple presidents. I think we're going to get some very interesting, more diverse heritages. I think in the coming 2030s. That seems like a safe bet. So after almost 2.5 centuries of independence from Britain, the presidents are they're all still British to some extent. Yes, that's basically what I got from this video. For those who don't know, Ulster is basically Northern Ireland. Gerald Ford being part Polish was the only thing here that surprised me. The shocking thing is that so many commentators are shocked. It's a British colony at the end of the day. I mean, I did think we were going to see a little bit more diversity by the 20th century, especially the 21st century, but nah, it's just all British. Not a single Italian. That's crazy. Who is the biggest Italian U.S. politician right now that could be plausibly elected? Cuomo? No, I don't think so. That's literally the first one that was brought up right here, or basically Cuomo's. So that video was by History Geek. The timeline of the U.S. territory and who led U.S. territory when we were growing. So we're actually starting this video off before the presidents because you kind of have to. We obviously grew. We didn't just spawn into the world as the 13 colonies. So we actually have to go back to the Continental Congress. Peyton Randolph, look at that. For 47 days, Harry Middleton for 4 days. What the hell is going on? Oh, so this is actually, that's right. So we did... It's not even 1776 yet. We're about to get there. But these leaders were not ruling for a very long time. 4 days, 14 days. Finally, John Hancock for 2 years. So this is, keep in mind how big we're growing down at the very bottom. That's an important factor here. So Henry Lawrence, this is so interesting because they never really teach us this. They don't teach us much about the Continental Congress. I'm sure that's just like, probably to keep it easier on like 12-year-olds. Like, is it important that the 12-year-olds know these dudes? Maybe not. You should probably maybe know the first one, but a lot of these dudes were ruling for so little. It's like, I could see why the school system was just like, just say George Washington was the first, and don't go any further before that. John Jay, Continental Congress. So this is when we're still fighting the American independence against the British. Samuel Huntington for 2 years there. What the heck? There was a brief moment where he had Louisiana. We're going to take Louisiana, though, eventually from the French. Thomas McKean, is that how you say that? John Hanson. Now, finally, we're actually finally ending. We have finally ended the independence. Sorry, yeah, the Declaration of Independence. Now we get. Dang, we're still going up. What the timeline of U.S. president time? What is going on here? Oh, it's gonna be. Sorry, George Washington's coming up. It took me a second. I did not realize we went through this many dudes beforehand. But hey, they were expanding the empire a lot, the American empire. So we weren't quite manifest destiny at this point. But yeah, by the time we were done with the British and we had gotten our dub, we had expanded pretty far beyond. We've doubled or maybe even 2.5 to our size since the 13 colonies days. So I'm gonna go ahead and go back to the 1780s. John Hancock. So now we're stretching over here to the Midwest. This is when we have I think this is when the state of Virginia is really, really long. When you look at the old state, I'm not just saying that because they used to still have West Virginia. West of Virginia breaks away during the Civil War, but all the states are just extended their territory out. Maybe they're still doing this right here. Arthur St. Clair, 1787. These leaders were just going back and forth, and they all had the same hairdos. No style changes because all the leaders were going, okay, finally the first presidential election in 1788. It's about time. Okay, so now things can get going. So we're about to start Manifest Destiny North America, and there's a lot more to it than just that. John Adams, the second president. All these dudes, by the way, with English and Scottish and Welsh ancestry. All British. Surprise, surprise. Thomas Jefferson gets the Louisiana Purchase. This is 1801. That is because Napoleon is back in charge in France. So France is like, you know what? Go ahead and have this. And they say that France knew exactly what they were doing, trying to create an American empire that can compete with the British. James Madison holds onto that territory. He also is 2 terms, like Thomas Jefferson. James Monroe finally extends us to Oregon and Washington, which is called the Northwest Territories, I believe, at this point. Or no, sorry. The British Columbia. Something like that is what we called it. But this was not for sure. This was shared with the British over here. What was that called again? We didn't finally create a line with the British in Canada until a little bit later on. John Quincy Adams, Andrew Jackson. So right now, all the stuff that we don't control is under Mexico's land. Mexico just got their independence, by the way, in this timeline. Martin Van Buren. So the big one is Polk. Polk is a huge one. Those early presidents, pretty big for Manifest Destiny sort of thing, bringing the American people to the other side of the continent, to the Pacific Ocean. William Harrison, Martin Van Buren, that first Dutch dude, John Tyler. So we're about to get into war with Mexico, and there it is. James Polk is the big one, because James Polk gets us a ton of new land. Obviously, he introduces Texas, California, Arizona, Nevada, a bunch of new places into the Union. But there was a lot of talks of taking even more. Polk was going to take there was thought that Polk could have taken the northern states from Mexico that we now know the northern states, Nuevo Leon, Chihuahua. What is that other one Sonora, deep down into the northern parts of the Mexican states. They were going to take the Yucatan Peninsula. They were going to take Cuba away. They could have gotten even more. And it was probably, a lot of people give Polk credit for not taking as much as he did. That was a big thing. There needs to be a purchase, by the way. There's going to be another purchase. America is going to give $11 million to Mexico to take basically southern part of Arizona. So this is actually accurate. The map is supposed to look a little bit weird. And so is this going to reflect the Civil War? That's what I want to know. Millard Fillmore for a term there. That actually just looks like the 30 Rock guy. I don't know. I'm blanking. He shot somebody. That's what he looks like. Franklin Pierce for a 1 term. James Buchanan. And here we go. So you're not going to reflect the U.S. Civil War. Wait, why is this white? Was South Carolina not under his... So you're not going to do... Okay. Well, anyways, we got Andrew Johnson getting in Alaska. So the Russians sell us Alaska, and bam. And that is the biggest state in the U.S., and it's so huge. We purchased all that land up there. Ulysses Grant. So now we have to get Hawaii. And then there's going to be a big old war for the Spanish-American War. We take a bunch away from the dying, decrepit Spanish Empire. So there's actually not much growth that happens until 1898 and in the early 1900s. I really wish they reflected... I guess it would look weird because it would look like Abraham Lincoln did something, bad when in reality he forced unity back into the country. If you kind of separated the U.S. into the south and the north, they would maybe misleadingly make it seem like the Lincoln lost land. It's not really how it worked out. But anyways, Grover Cleveland and then Benjamin Harris. We got Hawaii. No, we're getting islands in the Pacific, though. This is the American Samoa Islands. So now we're beginning to grow a bit more. We're starting to make our own American empire. And William McKinley. So he is he leads the U.S. during the Spanish-American War. So we get Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippines. Those are the big ones here. Also Guam from this win. We also have Hawaii. So bam. Theodore Roosevelt. Now, Theodore Roosevelt, I guess briefly had, the Panama Canal, and then is this Guatemala or Honduras? There was a fight down there. William Taft. So now we technically do still control the Panama Canal. We don't give that to them until, like, what is it, 1970s or 1999 or something like that. So we're going to continue to control that land down there. Woodrow Wilson. Now, I wonder, are we going to include occupied Germany after World War II? Warren Harding. We might. Calvin Coolidge, so 1920s, Roaring 20s. We actually, these maps look a little bit wonky. It's kind of hard to, they're really blobby. It's kind of hard to tell. Is that including Guantanamo Bay, basically, in Cuba? It looks like it, maybe. Great Recession. Franklin Roosevelt. They have Franklin Roosevelt controlling Greenland and Iceland. Why is that? Why is that? Did we de facto control Greenland when Denmark got occupied? Yes, I think so, but Iceland's the confusing one for me because I thought basically the British controlled Iceland. Anyways, those act as like nice little naval islands, jumping off ports. Okay, so we gave that stuff back to Denmark. We let Iceland become independent again. We gave the Philippines their freedom on July 4th, and we are going to keep all this other stuff, I believe, except for the Panama Canal. So actually, territory-wise, we're done. We can probably just let this video play out because I don't think we're going to lose anything else. It's going to be interesting because, yeah, nothing is going to change for 70 years, but what will be the next territorial change? Now, obviously, Trump talks about this a lot. He started this first term off very big in this, getting, you know what? We got the Mariana Trench. Am I reading that right? Yeah. Okay, under Gerald Ford. Interesting. Yeah, so Trump's been talking about how he's going to extend. He wants to take over the Panama Canal. He wants to make Canada 51st state. He wants to take back Greenland. I doubt any of that is going to happen. But when will we see the next territorial change? And I think it's actually going to be much more likely that we lose territory. I feel like then gain territory. Just because, not that we couldn't gain territory. It's just kind of not a good look. It's not a good PR move to take land, especially if it's not a decision made by the people that the land we're taking. I think that the most likely situation is that Puerto Rico goes independent, and that's the next territorial change the U.S. Has happened. George W. Bush. Oh, that's right. There was like an invasion of Panama again, right? So that's why Panama is. Oh, so there was some brief. Oh, are we going to control Iraq? No, they did not include Iraq or Afghanistan, even though we have their stuff. This is not including U.S. military bases, by the way. U.S. military bases all over the place. Okay, so now no official territorial changes. Joe Biden. He looks so sad. Why did they make him frowning like that? Okay, well, that's to be seen. That is to be seen. We might need to update this video just in case Trump does actually get new stuff. And here's a timeline of the biggest empires of all time, starting with the top 20. So we're starting actually with the Tang Dynasty. There's going to be a lot of different versions and forms of China to pop up on this list. But good thing we do have the kilometers included, the squared kilometers included. So the Portuguese Empire, which, funny enough, I mean, the actual land that Portugal controlled in Europe, relatively very small compared to their overseas colonies, Brazil, Mozambique, Angola. These were massive, massive places. And then the Achaemenid Empire by Darius the Great. This is like a Persian empire or something similar to that. Very, very similar. So now we're entering into the 17th ranked. We have Western Han Dynasty, again another form of China. It's very funny how oftentimes there's always like this weird little arm that China stretches, and then it kind of reaches sometimes over into Central Asia. So Emperor Wu led that, 6 million squared kilometers. The Golden Horde, which is obviously extremely impressive after the Mongolian Horde. that formed out of that, but still nowhere close to where the Mongolian horde started, and we're going to see about that. The Turkic Khaganate, is that how you say that? This is a caliphate after the rise of Islam back in 644. I don't think they got as big as the Umayyad Empire, which should also pop up. Another form of China, the Ming Dynasty. See, as you can see, most of the Chinese forms it's because most of the ethnically Chinese people, the Han, basically, the big ethnic group inside of China currently, they live all along here. But as every iteration grows, China goes further and further into continental Asia. Sometimes they grab up Manchuria, and then they grab Mongolia, and they get even more outer Manchuria, what is now today Russian lands. The Empire of Japan. Everyone forgets how big the Empire of Japan had gotten briefly. Now, it was not a very long-lasting empire, obviously, because it did only last there for like a couple of years. Once they bombed Pearl Harbor, it was doomed. But they got really big for a second there. It's been very interesting to see if this empire was forced to maintain itself, how that would work. Could Hirohito here... it wasn't even just the Emperor Hirohito. There's more people in charge. What's his name? Togo was a big military commander. But how long would the Empire of Japan really be able to control all this territory? That's something I always wonder. It would have been a difficult thing to do, but they did access a lot of China. As long as they kept China fractured, they'd be in a pretty safe position, I would say. The Empire of Brazil, it's basically just Brazil, and then they also have Uruguay. That helps. We have the nomads here of the 200 BC. That doesn't look as big as some of these other nations we've seen, but I guess it is. The Yan Dynasty, or basically when Mongolia controlled all of China and the Korean Peninsula. So now we're getting into the top 8. The Umayyad Caliphate. This is, again, another 100 years after the rise of Islam, so they stretch all the way from, they have all of the Persian Empire to the Iberian Peninsula. This is an absolutely massive nation here. The Abbasid Caliphate, just slightly bigger. Basically, they're tied, 8 and 9, which is kind of crazy. What makes them the same? Why did he get 7? Why did he get 7? Anyways, the French Colonial Empire, they got 6. So the French got pretty good if only they held on to that French Louisiana territory, right? If they held on to French Louisiana, they would have been maybe closer to the number 1 nation. I'm not going to say who it is. The Spanish Empire getting absolutely massive. Now, can't you possibly include the Iberian Union? Because there was a couple of decades there where Spain and Portugal had formed a union. That where they controlled everything in Iberia, and then a lot of Brazil and whatever Portugal had in Africa. But yeah, that might have been even bigger, but I don't know why that can't officially be on the list. Qing Dynasty, absolutely massive. 14.7 million squared kilometers. This is without Korea, too. This is crazy how big the Qing Dynasty got. This was before their century of humiliation. It was not going to be very good for them after that. The Russian Empire is in 3rd, even bigger than the Soviet Union here, because they had all of Finland and then all of Alaska. Those are the big reasons why they got even bigger. And I guess for a brief moment there, they wrapped all the way around the Caspian Sea. For a brief moment, they had Manchuria in China. So that was in 3rd place. And then, of course, Mongolia. Mongolia is... it's crazy because you can kind of give them up here. They didn't technically have it. I think it's funny because if you look straight up at the numbers, it looks like these are similar. But I think what Mongolia was able to do and accomplish several centuries even before the Russian Empire is far more impressive. Because what the Russians control here, that's not a lot of people. Let's be real. A lot of Siberian wilderness, there's not a lot of people there. There's not a lot of people in Alaska. It's not to say that they didn't control a huge area, but it's like Genghis Khan didn't really need to control any of this stuff up here. There was no one even there to be a threat. I still think that, because I know that none of this does factor in all this land north of Siberia, and I'm sure there were different peoples and hordes and tribes up there that he just didn't go after. But he essentially kind of had that land. No, I guess he didn't necessarily, but anyways, what he controlled here is far deeper into Pakistan, in all of Iran, all of Turkey. Yeah, what Mongolia was able to accomplish, far more impressive. Even though numbers-wise it looks like it's similar. And then the British Empire is the most impressive. It is not a contiguous empire. That's the biggest thing. You have to make a differentiation here. Mongolia, it was just one giant empire that was all connected. The British were able to do this because of technology, because of their fleet, but yeah, and they were the de facto rulers of the world for like 100 and 200 years there. 150 years there. I mean, since the 7 Years' War, they had pretty much dominated. They took a couple L's when they lost the American continents, when they lost to the 13 colonies, but for the most part, they were the de facto rulers. They just ruled over everything right over here. The Mongols were the greatest in my opinion. They were the second largest empire in history right after the Brits, but the difference is Mongols were Iron Age in medieval times, while British were Gunpowder Age, taking over lands whose people were living in the Bronze Age and Stone Age. This is a really, really good point. I like that a lot. That's kind of what I was arguing, why you can't even compare, I think, the Russian Empire to the Mongolian Empire. There's big differences. There's obviously big differences here, and that is one way to look at it. I think there is a debate to be had that the Mongols had a more impressive empire, even though they didn't have necessarily the pure land and territory that the British did, at least. At least 5 of these empires were related to the Mongols. That's even more impressive because, like, I guess you could say the British were related to the Americans. Well, the British are related to a lot of different nations, but not in the top 20. And what's impressive about what the Mongols did is these were in the top 20 biggest empires of all time. The British are definitely related to Canada, who's the second biggest, largest nation right now. And then look at the U.S. when they had kind of an empire, when they controlled all of Cuba and the Philippines. So, but yeah, these are actually huge. Again, that video is by History Geek. Definitely go check them out. DruuuWu Labubu, Drew's AI girlfriend, LuxembourgLover, LoreTrack, William, Never Change Drew. Unless you want to. Nolan, AlexandertheTerrible, NordTyrol, Miglu the Goat, KingBearHaze, Connor Pavlik, Fredrik Tibblin, and Tambre. To all my Patreon subscribers this month, thank you. If you want your name here, check the description down below.